I'd like to invite Dan Von Hoyle on stage to tell us about Bessie Coleman. Dan.
Thank you very much. This is a fun talk for me because Bessie was actually an inspiration to my own flight training. I'm a pilot, got my pilot license about 27 years ago. In the winter of 1923, if you happen to be a wealthy person in Orlando, Florida, and you're needing a manicure, you might find yourself at the table of this charming, bright, very talkative 28-year-old woman named Elizabeth, who is doing your nails. The remarkable thing you may have noticed is how fast she was. Whether or not you noticed the little yellowing framed headline next to her from a newspaper in Chicago that proclaimed her as the world's fastest manicurist. But what you may not have known is that even up until a year before that, she had a much more remarkable achievement, and that is she was one of America's most famous aviation pioneers. She was actually the first African-American aviatrix. And the first woman pilot in the world to hold an international pilot's license that enabled her to fly anywhere in the world. And so for the past 18 months before you're having her nails done, she was actually thrilling thousands of people on both sides of the Atlantic with all of her stunts. But let's take a step back to show you how she got here. She was born in 1892 in Atlanta, Texas, and she was the 10th of 13 children born into a very large family of sharecroppers. When she was 3, she and her family moved to Waxahachie, Texas, picking cotton and doing laundry and that sort of thing. When she was 7 years old, her father had to leave the family, go to Oklahoma in search of better work, and he never returned. So she, from the time of 7 until 23, stayed in Waxahachie with her family, supporting them, trying to get a better life for herself. And so seeking that better life, she and 2 of her brothers actually moved to Chicago. She got a job as a manicurist at this place called the White Sox Barbershop on the Chicago South Side, where actually a lot of very elite people would come and have their nails done. And while working there, she meets a man by the name of Robert Abbott. She becomes friends with him. He's the millionaire founder and editor of the Chicago Defender, which was the world's largest and most read newspaper of the Afro-American press. Her friendship with Abbott exposed her also, as well as being a manicurist, to a lot of the black community leaders and the socialites of the time. And what was funny is that Abbott really kind of had a crush on Bessie, and he just was constantly trying to impress her by including her in his newspaper. And so for really bizarre things, in fact, one of the things that he would do is that he actually did a story on her, proclaiming her as the world's fastest manicurist. And so that's a very nice thing to do. I've certainly had worse first dates. So anyway, in the meantime, Bessie was becoming enamored with all these newsreels of people flying, and she wanted to be a pilot. So her brother comes back from the Great War and is talking about, oh, how great French women are, and oh, you want to learn to fly, all these French women are flying, you could never do that. And so she goes, I'm going to be a pilot, and so she tried, but of course, because of her race and because of her gender, no one would teach her how to fly. Boo. Yeah. So anyways, Bessie got really determined to do this and to taking flying lessons. And so she made up this little idea to talk to Abbott and say, hey, let's do this little PR thing where you pay to have me become a pilot. And so that was pretty good. And so she took the proper advantage of that. And he said, well, if you demonstrate you're serious about it. So she took 2 jobs, both as a manicurist and also making chili. She went on her off time and learned French because she said, I'm going to go to fucking France and learn how to fly. So she does, and then she hops on a ship. Ships! Because she said, I will not take no for an answer. I'm going to France. So she goes to France, and she learns how to fly, and she goes to this the most prestigious aviation academy in France, in the Somme. Right there over there. Right there over there. Right. Very good. So, yeah. So the interesting thing about that is that because Bessie didn't know how to drive, and Bessie didn't ride a bicycle, so she had to walk 9 miles each way in order to take these flying lessons. She did that uphill both ways in the snow of France through the bomb craters. She received her license on June 15th of 1921, and not just any pilot's license, but the very first international pilot's license, so she could fly anywhere in the world. And she's the first woman in history to do so, inspiring another woman in America, by the way, by the name of Amelia Earhart. There you go. Very good. So, with the publicity of the Chicago Defender, she became very famous at this and had a triumphant return to the USA. But she realized that in order to make money doing anything other than giving people rides, she would have to learn how to do stunts and be a barnstormer and be a daredevil. And she didn't have the skills to do this, and nobody would teach her here. And so she had to go back to France because her whole point was that she wanted to. Her whole goal was to be able to train other African Americans how to fly. She thought the best way to do that was to get trained in barnstorming. So she went to Europe and got aviation training. And she met Mr. Fokker, who was the creator of the Fokker triplane. She flew all these really fantastic high-performance airplanes, and she went over the Kaiser's Palace, and people were taking movies of her, and it was a whole lot of fun. She became very, very famous, known as the world's greatest woman flyer. I don't know why they had to qualify that. So this is another great saying that she said: the air is the only place free from prejudice. And clearly she didn't fly certain airlines. So to remain nameless. There we go. All right. So anyway, so she was so famous that this guy named Peter Jones wanted to make a movie about her called Shadow and Sunshine. The trouble is that they're going to make this big, long movie about her. She shows up to set, and the first thing, okay, we want you to walk with a cane and a knapsack, and we want you to talk with an accent, and we want you to be uneducated. And she said, I'm not doing that Uncle Tom shit. And she walks off the set. And leaves all these people, so because she stood for, so they were so desperate, they found this Harlem dancer. And they said, okay, well, you look kind of like her, so we will train. No one else, there was no other African American woman who knew how to fly, and so they trained her at Curtis Field, where Beachy was. Mentioned earlier, and they were able to do that because they threw enough money. So apparently enough money was all that it took to get the second black aviatrix in the air. And that's Miss Bessie Allison. They made the movie. So poor Bessie couldn't get booked, and so she couldn't make any money, so she had to go back to Orlando, Florida, and which is where this story started. And she was doing nails as a manicurist, making time. But then this company in Oakland remembers, like, whatever happened to Bessie Coleman? I really like Bessie Coleman. So they hired her. They said, why don't you come out to be our spokesperson? And she was the first African-American endorser for a major product. With that money that she took, she's opened a flight school at Oakland Airport, which is why if you drive into Oakland Airport, you can see her sign today, welcoming you in. She bought an airplane for $400, and on her way to a big air show that she can perform at, the plane's engine quit, she crashed, she was nearly killed, she was in the hospital for 3 months. And she still was going to say that, tell them as soon as I can walk, I'm going to fly. And she did, but the trouble was that she crashed again, and so they grounded her, and so because she couldn't fly, she took up parachuting, and so she would jump out of airplanes and off of wings while another person flew. So she had a show in Jacksonville, Florida in 1926. No one would rent her an airplane, again, because of her race and her gender. And so she had to buy a plane in Texas, and a mechanic that she barely knew by the name of William D. Wills went out and got it and flew it in 21 hours. The engine quit twice as he was flying out there. He got no sleep. That day they came up to do a practice run, and she was like looking over the top. She unbuckled her seatbelt to look out for the drop zone to see where she was going, and the engine quit again. The plane stalled, and it sometimes happens in a stall. It rolls over as a spin. She falls out to her death from 1,000 feet. So the pilot, Mr. William Wills, continued to fly the plane as much as he could. He crashed into a tree where he was trapped in the wreckage. Bessie Coleman's publicity agent came over, and rather than helping him out, looked on, lit a cigarette, threw the match, and it set the aviation fuel on fire and burned him to death in the wreckage. Yeah. And the worst thing about this is that in the papers, he's the only one who has his picture in the paper, and Bessie didn't. So that's even worse. So 16,000 people paid their respects to Bessie Coleman, and many other things have happened to that since then. She's on one of the dollars, she's on one of our stamps, and just a little bit of an addendum because of that. Remember when she walked off the set and they had to hire a Harlem dancer to play her? Well, this Harlem dancer did pretty well for herself, and in 1954, she was elected as the first African-American representative of the state of New York. So, the butterfly effect has some good things. So, with that, I really want to offer a well-deserved and long-delayed toast to Bessie Coleman, Queen Bess. Thank you.